Welcome into press coverage. Dan Hope joined by Garrick, Hodge as Ohio State received some unwelcome news on the recruiting trail today as David Sanders Jr., who had been Ohio State's clear top target along the offensive line and really any position remaining in the 2025 class, announced his commitment to Tennessee on Saturday. A close battle between the Buckeyes and Volunteers that went on for months. There was no question that David Sanders Jr. was the top priority along the offensive line for Ohio State in this 2025 recruiting class. But now he's heading elsewhere and, quite frankly, continuing a pattern that we've seen here for several years now for Ohio State, where the Buckeyes have often failed to close the deal in landing top out-of-state targets along the offensive line, and at a position that is probably drawing more scrutiny than any other going into the 2024 season. This, frankly, was the kind of battle that Justin Frye and the Buckeyes needed to win.
Yeah, no way to sugarcoat it, Dan. Bad loss. Pretty deflating loss for most of Ohio State's recruiting fans. And I wouldn't say that it's deflating because you missed out on David Sanders. I mean, if you're looking at it objectively, an offensive tackle as highly touted as he is from North Carolina. I mean, ever since they offered him years ago, you're like, well, you have to try because, of course, you have to try. But every Southern school in the world is going to want him, and you never know how it's going to go. So it's not like, this was a can't-miss guy from Ohio State's perspective, and he was like 2 hours up in their backyard, right? But the more concerning factor around the miss on David Sanders when it looked like they were trending very much so to get him as recently as probably a month ago is there's no clear-cut option of where they go from here. I mean, the boards are just – the options are limited across the board. I mean, of all the offensive linemen that took official visits to Ohio State, probably the only one they still have a pretty good chance with is Javon McFadden. And Javon McFadden's a nice player. I like him a lot. But even if you add a player of his caliber, that's not going to necessarily mitigate the loss of Sanders exactly the way that Ohio State would like to. So there's no clear-cut options. I don't know if you go back to the drawing board and try to work on some flip options, try to do some scouting late. But to your point, Dan, it's been a consistent disappointing pattern of sometimes not casting a wide enough net to when your top of the line prospects don't end up working out and they go elsewhere, you're just left with nothing. And you have to scramble and you have to have backup plans. And I'm sure they're privy to backup plans that we know nothing about, and they're probably already concocting how they're going to attack this. But from the outside looking in, there just isn't a clear, concise, all right, we missed out on David Sanders, but now X prospect is right available for the taking, and we feel good about it. Now, that's not to say that they haven't made, a nice stride, and Carter Lowe is a top 50 prospect in the country, and it's not all doom and gloom here. Don't want to make it seem like it is, but the two prospects committed are two Ohio prospects that were very likely always kind of trending to ending up in Ohio State. So, the recruiting hasn't been great with out-of-state offensive linemen the past 3 recruiting cycles, and you just kind of have to wonder where Ohio State goes from here.
Yeah, if you look since Justin Frye became Ohio State's offensive line coach in 2022, with 2023 being his first actual recruiting cycle on the job, Ohio State has only landed 3 out-of-state offensive linemen. 2 of those coming last year from neighboring states, in Ian Moore from Indiana and Gabe Van Sickle from Michigan. The other one in the 2023 class coming from Miles Walker from Connecticut. Ian Moore was the only one of those guys who was even a top 250 prospect in his class. Not to say that, Gabe Van Sickle and Miles Walker weren't fine additions, but you look at, even those battles. What Justin Frye has not shown that he can do is when all the top programs in the country want an offensive lineman, Ohio State can go win that race. That just hasn't happened. It's happened, Carter Lowe, it's happened with Luke Montgomery, but those are guys who grew up as Ohio State fans in the state of Ohio. You are expected to win those recruiting battles. It doesn't mean they're not good wins, but it also means you don't get an overwhelming amount of credit for those wins because those are the wins you're supposed to go get. And when you're at Ohio State, you're also supposed to go get top prospects from elsewhere in the country. We are seeing them do it at lots of other positions. That's why, even with this loss, Ohio State still has the number one recruiting class in the 2025 cycle. And to your point, it is not doom and gloom when we talk about the recruiting class as a whole, because this is a loaded recruiting class that still has a chance to be the best recruiting class of 2025. But, the offensive line is a position in general. You think about just the current team with 2 weeks to go until the start of a season. It's the biggest question mark position on this team right now. We also haven't seen Ohio State and Justin Frye have a ton of success recruiting transfer offensive linemen over the years. Now, they are going to have 2 transfers starting on their offensive line this year, and Josh Simmons at left tackle and Seth McLaughlin at center, but we've also seen them miss out on several transfer offensive line targets over the past 2 off seasons. And so you now look ahead to next off season and you think, well, if the board's now kind of bare on who you're going to be able to add on the offensive line, you're looking at probably losing 4 of your starting offensive linemen after this season. Ohio State is going to have to go back to the transfer portal again along the offensive line next year. And there's not a great track record here over the last couple years that gives you a ton of confidence that Ohio State is going to go win those battles for top transfer offensive linemen either.
Yeah, like you said, I think the transfer portal option could be option 1, 2, and 3. I mean, you might need to take multiple offensive linemen in the transfer portal depending on what decisions guys make. No, Josh Simmons is projected to have a big year, and I wouldn't be surprised if he has that good year and could be a 2nd or 3rd round pick that he ends up opting to go to the NFL. So you're looking at replacing both offensive tackles, and it depends on how much confidence you have in guys in the pipeline right now. All right, who could we stick at left tackle? Who could we stick at right tackle? Compared to, all right, would this group of 5 left tackle fit in pretty nicely? Now, I guess if you want to give them one recruiting win in the transfer portal, it's that Josh Simmons has been a pretty nice addition from the transfer portal. The one time they've made if you want to call it a marquee addition from the transfer portal, it has worked out effectively. He's been a consistent starter. Penalties have always kind of been his weak part in the game, but at least, he didn't commit 17 like he did at San Diego State. So there is some progression there. But I think transfer portal's a really dire need. And I mean, that's I guess if you want to call it like 5 months from now's problem, but and just let the season play out first. But looking even a little further than that, the 2026 offensive line class has kind of been tailor-made for Ohio State to kind of get the lion's share of recruiting victories when you have 2 top 100 offensive tackles that reside in the state of Ohio. You've got a lot of interior guys from your recruiting footprint, the Ohio, the Michigan, the kind of area that, really could be good players if Ohio State wants to push for them right now and not 2 months before they make a decision. And the number 1 offensive tackle in the country in 2026 has already said that he likes Ohio State a lot. He's visited Ohio State. You got interior linemen like Micah Champion-Smith, who has visited, I think, campus 4 times and is seemingly in love with the program. So I would say it's a can't-miss class, but given the track record that Ohio State has kind of shown with offensive line recruiting over the past couple of cycles, I don't want to go that far. I should be able to say, go that far, and that Ohio State should be able to produce a slam dunk, can't miss class no matter what, frankly, because, especially with 2 top 100 offensive linemen in your backyard. So I guess if you just land Maxwell Riley and Sam Greer and nothing else, then you should be able to go, all right, we feel good about this. But there's just a lot of uncertainty. And to the point of the column you wrote today, Dan, I think that before we make a definitive judgment on Justin Frye's tenure, we kind of have to see how the offensive line development plays out for this season, because that's going to be the biggest check mark on his resume, because as he wrote in the column at 11warriors.com, his biggest strength as a coach has always been development and getting guys to progress better than you'd expect and, turn them from a project into a capable player. So how much he's able to do that and how effective Ohio State's offensive line is probably going to be a deciding factor in Justin Frye's tenure at Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about it being 5 months problem, it's only going to be Justin Frye's problem in 5 months if that offensive line is championship caliber this year. That has to be the expectation because he's now going into his 3rd year as Ohio State's offensive line coach. As we talked about, there's really not any home run recruiting wins that he can put on his resume, which means you have to back up your reputation as a developer by getting elite results on the field. And realistically, whether his offensive line can perform up to expectations this year could make or break whether this Ohio State football team can win a national championship this year. Because the rest of the roster, especially with the growth we've seen from Will Howard in preseason camp, looks like a national championship team. So that offensive line could ultimately make or break whether this team is able to win a national championship this year. And I think whether that offensive line is championship caliber is going to determine whether or not Justin Frye is still on Ohio State's staff 5-6 months from now. Now, to the point of a 2026 class, I think, it would certainly also help Justin Frye if he could get an early commitment from a guy or two in that 2026 class. I mean, Ohio State in general, it's been over a year since Chris Henry Jr. committed to that class, and Ohio State is yet to get another commitment in that class. So they could use some 2026 commits in general. But if you're talking about one area of focus, if you were doing an early heat check for the 2026 class, I would think, you could tell me, but I would think you'd probably put guys like Maxwell Riley and Sam Greer right at the top of that list because they cannot afford to miss out on in-state offensive linemen of that caliber with some of the misses they've had on out-of-state targets.
Yeah, they'd probably be number 1 and number 2. And then actually probably the top 6 would probably comprise of 4 offensive linemen, if we're being honest, just because of how dire of a need it's been. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough day for Ohio State. As we kind of wrap this up here, not necessarily because, they didn't get David Sanders. Like, it would have been nice to have David Sanders, and probably up until the summer, you never really felt like they were in the driver's seat to land him. There was that 2-month stretch from June until August. I guess maybe backtracking end of July, because once he started taking the Nebraska and Tennessee visits, everyone kind of went, oh, well, I don't know. But it was that 2-month stretch where it looked like Ohio State was in pretty good position to add him. But other than that, like, it always was, I mean, he would be such a great get. You hope you can get him, but the bigger casualty of the day is not knowing where to go from here and not having a backup plan. And you put all your eggs in the David Sanders basket, and unfortunately it didn't work out. And we'll see what they're able to do. We'll see what the offensive line looks like this year. And maybe there will be 2 amazing transfer portal tackles that are interested in Ohio State. So who knows? But yeah, in conclusion, it's not a great day for Ohio State recruiting, but the day can always be brighter tomorrow.
And I do think that this is going to make people think back to the fact that 3 weeks ago, when Ohio State could have hosted a non-campus recruiting event, it chose not to. And maybe if it did that, and it had gotten David Sanders Jr. on campus one more time and been able to make one more all-out pitch to David Sanders Jr., maybe this ends up differently today. We really don't know on that. I mean, I think the one thing we do know is that Ohio State did go all in trying to make David Sanders Jr. a Buckeye. I mean, there was a significant effort from Ohio State on the NIL side of things to try to win this recruitment. And so this was not a matter of not going all out, not doing everything it could to get David Sanders Jr. It was a matter of when you're trying to go for one of the top prospects in the country, it's always going to be difficult to win that recruitment, and the Buckeyes got beat out for it. I think the thing that's been perplexing to both of us is just the fact that Ohio State seemingly put all of its eggs into that basket, and now that he has gone elsewhere, it's like, what now?
I guess we'll find out, won't we? But at least, hey, if you need nothing else than to cheer you up, Buckeye fans, the season is officially 2 weeks away. They're going to start the season in very Michigan fashion by doing some very unsavory things to poor Akron when they come in here week 1. And the stain of the David Sanders recruiting loss will probably be a thing of the past in very short memory until it rears its ugly head in 5 months. But again, a problem for 5 months from now.
Yeah, Ohio State still has the number one ranked recruiting class of 2025, and it's considered one of the top 2 teams to win the national championship in 2024-2025 season, along with Georgia. So things could certainly be a lot worse for Ohio State. And you know what? One of the reasons why Ohio State didn't hold a recruiting event that weekend is because they know they're not going to have another weekend off if things go right for more than 5 months, because they're hoping that they're going to be playing in that national championship game in the middle of January. And so we will see if Ohio State ultimately gets there. We will have lots of more coverage coming on 11warriors.com, both of David Sanders Jr.'s decision and Ohio State football recruiting, as well as the upcoming Ohio State football season that starts just 2 weeks from today. So we thank you for joining us for another episode of Press Coverage. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon.